sometimes when I launch into a particular science or a particular like insight or idea, it's not always so understandable when I'm not able to explain like where is this coming from? Like what is the starting point? Because if you hold the energy will express itself through you. So the way you hold bodies and the way you use vibrations, it's the energy itself that would do it. So when a musician, like we have a Belgian here in Maya right now, and she's a musician, and now she's very chaotic. She's let go of a lot of her Belgian self. She's in the Philippines, and the Philippines is pure chaos. She's experimenting with it, and it can get really messy in the brain, but at the same time, something makes sense. And her occupation, I think in Antwerp, is it? No, I don't think it's in Brussels. To ask her, she works a lot with psychiatric community. Her actual work is she's a music therapist, and she works with psychiatric patients in a center. And she's a music therapist. Her job is to bring healing and music together. So now she's experiencing what her patients go through, which is what happens in the crazy mind. So it's really interesting what's coming out of here with the other musicians who are in the space, other music producers who are here right now. Okay, so we need to go back to the beginning. We need to find some kind of starting point before you go into construction. And I do hope that you do, anyone does. Where did this begin? Where did this start? So chaos belongs to the energy for sure, because when we look at the way the body works, there's a chaos there to begin with. So the body is a reflection of what's happening in the brain, happening in the mind, happening in the energy field. Chaos is maybe one word to describe that there's a lot happening all at the same time. And when we try to organize this thing that's happening all at once, the human tendency in art, in language, including in music, is to just allow things to happen one at a time. So this is what we're going to configure. From a deep history, the human brain had to train itself to learn how to sequence things and do things one at a time. But the old brain, the tribal brain, the indigenous brain, the ancient brain, was a multitasking brain. So somehow we're going back to that. Like, I can handle a lot. I can handle many, many things at the same time. So whether without energy work, this is something that's coming through in the way media, the way modern lifestyles are taking place. And there's so many spiritual modalities that's shifting the brain to becoming like that. So a lot of people went into inner dance primarily because it allows people to mess things up that might be a little bit too ordered, and you're going to have to find some confidence in okay, what do I do with people? How much am I allowed to mess up the order or the organization that's maybe holding ego, holding resistance, holding fear or judgment that is now ready to be surrendered or let go of. Yeah. So yeah, okay. Let's begin. I'm trying to find a starting point. So you have to bear with me. I'm waking up at 1 o'clock in the morning now and putting this big mess of the global mind into some kind of order as well. So right now I'm searching for questions. like some good questions that can bring us together. One question would be, where do we go when we go where we go? Which in this case is like that dream space, that psychedelic space, that magic space. Where do we go? So for some people, they go places and they see visions. We could also talk about dimensionalities. Dimensionality would be maybe the more interesting one, because it often doesn't matter what you see. What matters more is that what dimension are you in that allows you to see things in a certain way. Time isn't the same in each dimension, and time influences space. So when there's a certain speed in time, there's a certain way you access the space. Certain time zones accesses more space. Certain velocities or speeds would access like smaller space, and vice versa. Could be the opposite. So maybe a better question instead of when, where is when. Like instead of asking where do you go, the question could also be when do you go, which isn't a place anymore, it's a time. So, all right. Receiving the feedbacks that have happened across the world, like through so many people. Like in my case, I've watched tens of thousands of bodies, maybe by now, like 20 plus thousand bodies that I've trained and facilitated over the last 16 years. What did they share after going into the inner dance? Like what is the nature of the sharing? The more basic would be, okay, my body moved and I've never experienced that before. Other experiences would be, okay, I found this emotion inside me that was bottled up and I unleashed it and I cried. Or I had a conversation with my mother, or I saw the colors. I floated into space. I was flying. Or I felt the energy running through me. Those are the more simple ones, the more basic. The common, deeper sharing is this, and I just started to notice it slowly. I pieced it together later, realizing, oh wait, actually a lot of people were sharing this, and I didn't see it. I didn't acknowledge it as soon as it was coming up, because it almost didn't make sense in the beginning. But these deeper sharings were the ones that gave more understanding of what could have been happening to people, including us. Okay, let me. I opened this website where it was one of the first times I read something that someone wrote. This one came out in a newspaper. The biggest newspaper in the Philippines is the Philippine Daily Inquirer, and this is in 2010. And this was written by this man named Jaime Licauco. He's the most famous spiritual writer in the Philippines, and he attended an inner dance in 2010. His words were, I went into a trance and fell from my chair to the floor. So he wasn't even laying down. He was just hanging out in the workshop space. He fell from the chair to the floor and went into a journey from his adult life to childhood and then his birth. He saw inside the womb of his mother, then went further in time until today. And then he described it as an inner rebirth. powerful experience you couldn't forget. So yeah, that was in 2010. And probably I only started to acknowledge this type of experience maybe 4 or 5 years later. That I started to map it out in my mind. Like, oh wait a minute. How many times did people share that they went back into the womb? How many times did people say, I became like a baby, but a lot of people were saying that I want to open this space to see has this been in your experience, or as a space holder, did you hear someone say this? Or maybe you're in a session someone else is holding and this came up.
Yeah, a lot.
Mm.
Very, very common feedback for me. Especially, I've noticed with not really so much the people that come in, the first few times, but really people that I'm really guiding throughout these past months. There's this deepening that starts happening. And oftentimes, well, maybe it's in my case, it was associated with the regression that I once had during my transmission. But I heard it also as feedback from others that it will be associated to some kind of regression or related to an inner death they will experience.
Okay, thank you, Zenzi. Anyone else? I saw some people nod, actually, so it would be interesting for you to maybe voice this.
Hi. Yeah, also for me, like some participants in the last session that I facilitate, they also got so much in contact with their womb. And also personally, when I have been receiving, let's say, it happened to me as well to reconnect with that, and also to have visions associated to the womb and to me being a baby. So regarding inner dance, life force, it happens also.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. Anyone else? But already this is kind of like interesting coming from two people. So this is maybe one of the reasons for the chaos, if we weren't just looking at the music. Chaos belongs to the brain of a baby. And if we regress farther back, chaos belongs to the fetus. What does the fetus hear when they're still there in the womb? What kind of sounds are they exposed to, and how is the brain formulated before they come out and open their eyes to the sunshine? So in many ways, a lot of the music kind of brings people back there, or like either to push them back into that there, or to not push but just do it. Okay, it just gets them there. So that's one experience. That experience would be what we call developmental in terms of origin. Like, where did we come from? And the womb space isn't really just a place in your mother's belly. The womb space is a lot more. It could not have just been your mother's belly. It probably is a lot more. So that's why I shared the website, because it gives some perspectives to this. So that wasn't the only experience. That was just one in terms of the nature of experience. There was another kind of experience that's relatable to origins. Okay, so the womb is like an origin story. Like, where did I come from? How did I get here? And am I able to remember that? So the more this is experienced, and number two, the more it's talked about, it would just help you to notice. This is not something to force yourself to, okay, I want to go there. It's just part of the territory. if you do it. It's just something that would come up. So be aware of that when it's spoken, to be curious and to be listening to it. So the other experience would be, and I didn't have time to look through the internet where this might have been published. It's almost equal. Like half of the deep experiences would be, oh, they went back to the womb. Half of them wouldn't be to go back to the womb. It would be something mysterious. They would say, I don't know why, I don't understand how, but I went back to the earth. I went back to the origins of the earth. I went back to the beginning of time when earth was different somehow. I'm just going to say that because there are so many possible descriptions. Some would say, okay, when earth was being born, or a weird history of the earth that we don't have memories of, or when earth was beginning, or when earth was being born, like things like that. But the most common wording would be, I became the earth. I became the earth. And then when it would ask questions like, what do you mean you became the earth? Say something to do with when the earth was different. So I'm going to open that up. Is that something that has come through your own experience or the experience of others?
Personally, experiencing the womb during the inner dance also reconnect me to a near-death experience that I had in the past, where I was, almost drowning in the sea, and I had that kind of a moment of kind of see that movie of your person, of your identity, and I remember that I kind of like went into the womb, but I now realize, or at least that's what I'm observing or explaining to myself, that it's like a sorry, it's like a portal. So it was in between this being on earth as a human in a human body, and not being in a human body. So like a gate, I don't know, it's quite complicated to explain sometimes, but experiencing the womb in the inner dance has been like so much reconnecting to that experience of death, near death experience. So yeah, somehow I explain it like this to myself, or yeah.
Yeah, I understand you when you say it's kind of complicated because it's so far away from how we normally perceive things. It's like there are layers there that are hard to hold, even as you try to describe it, because it's happening outside of our way of languaging and our way of thinking, which is organizational in a way. So those are two things that are interesting. When you go back to the womb, this has a developmental sense. That developmental is a word in psychology to describe how were you initiated into the planet from a baby. What did your mind look like, and then how did you grow to a thinking person, an aware person? What did the world look like when you were in the womb, and then as a baby, and then as a toddler, and then you discovered language, and you have memories. Why do you not have memories of a really early time? And when you have a near death, or when you go through a spiritual journey, why do you suddenly remember? Why do you suddenly remember? And then, yeah, when you listen to people who went into the journey even deeper, why did it suddenly become a much larger awareness that wasn't just personal? Because, like the life review is, okay, saw my whole life in but a moment. And then when I went even deeper, I saw the earth itself, or the nature of the earth itself, before I became like a person. And the earth wasn't exactly like a planet that has geographies, and it's something else. It's like Yeah, I can't describe it right now within this sort of contextualization. That's what people struggle with. It's like, I'm trying to describe what is it? What does the world look like from there, from in here? So I find that interesting. That's not developmental, like perceiving the earth from the point of view of energy. That's evolutionary in a way. Developmental is personal. It's to perceive the deep nature of time from a personal field, and then evolutionary would be to perceive the space from an earth field, which is not personal. It's impersonal. So when you die, ego would also not exist in a way, and what would give way would be a planetary consciousness. So this would be available in the spaces that we hold, and depending on how you speak when you're holding this, people would go there. You know, either a personal story, and then so many others would be. They would see forests, they would see rivers, they would see deserts, they would dive through oceans. That's what I mean about perceiving more the earth rather than personal details that have to do with your mother, your father, your brother, your sister. Um, so somehow what's interesting is they're intertwined. They're not separate. Um, we're closing a retreat group here in Maya, and there's this lady from Italy, and she stopped me once after a session during breakfast time, and she said, I don't know what happened, but I was seeing two things at the same time. I was seeing like Asia as an image, but for some reason I was seeing Europe, like a scene from Asia. It could have been the beach or something. But she was seeing like a busy space, like a street in Europe. And she couldn't understand, how am I able to look at the same thing at the same time? No, how am I able to see two separate things that are so polar and opposite? You know, a scene from nature in the tropical, and then a scene in the city in the temperate climate that's super busy, but they were the same image, but they were two images. So it was like a split. And I've heard that several times before, like someone would see a beach in Thailand and the cliffs in Ireland, and they couldn't tell the difference, but they were still happening separately. And then I remember a guy in London, he was seeing the subway, the underground in London, and then he was seeing like China, like something out of Crouching Tiger, a scene from ancient China, and then he was seeing London, and he said they were hipped together, which is kind of weird. So there's something about our brain that's allowing us to perceive things in that way, which might be more related to like the dream space or the psychedelic space. My perception of this is that this is actually what it looks like from the womb, not from the outside looking in. So right now you're not in the womb. You're there in your, maybe in your room or your car, or taking a walk somewhere, and then you're looking at the womb from the outside in. But when you're inside the womb, I my perception or memory of it is that I'm looking at it from the inside out, where I'm looking at my whole life and the world that brings context to the life, but from inside, so I can see everything at the same time, the whole vantage. So some people get glimpses of it. Say, oh, I saw Thailand and Ireland, or China and London, and they were the same, which is so not personal even, you know? It's not like a person looking at it. It's like parts of the earth being made aware at the same time. So from the womb, I think it was possible to see all of the days all of the places, all the people, all the situations, all at the same time. And then when we're born, we have to be initiated into a story sequence where things aren't chaotic. They would start to neatly unfold one at a time. So I was looking at this for a long period, and I was conducting all these trainings, and I realized something. I realized something really important. Okay, so I'm a father of two kids. One of my children is 12, the other is 9, turning 13 and 10. And when I was holding space a lot, I would be traveling across the world, or people from everywhere would come to us, to my retreat center. I had a chance to see all these adults, these old people, like they would go into the process. So they'd be there in the floor, they would be crawling around like an animal, or like some spirit being. Their bodies would be moving. And then after the trainings and the workshops, which I would do every day, I would go home. I would walk home. The house is nearby, and then my kids would be there, and then I would hold them, I would take care of them, I would love them, and I'd talk to them, receive them. So this was at the height of the process, and because I had two of them, right when my son, the older one, grew up into language and consciousness, then my daughter was born. So I was able to perceive the world through their eyes. Okay. And what I realized is this, that there was no difference between the brain states of these adults who were going really deep. And then when I would hold my son and my daughter, I realized, oh my God, like, no way. Really, I saw that the quality and the nature of language, of body movements, of brain states, of energy, it was exactly the same. It was exactly the same. So I went into a deep inquiry. I did research and I studied it. And I saw all of the messages were pointing to this, that this is what we're doing. We're actually going back to this original brain state, for one reason or another. That's what this inner dance brain is. It's actually the brain of a fetus, or a 1-year-old, or a 2-year-old, or a 3-year-old. The brain and mind of a 1, 2, and 3-year-old is very different, because there are these developmental stages we go through. Dimensionally, in terms of time, there are the big differences. So there are these levels of awareness that we go through, and one of those levels is the womb consciousness. So depending on how you hold the music, how you hold the energy, the intention, the presence, you would be walking around, and next thing you know, you see people, they're in that position, they're there, and probably that could have happened to you when you're not moving anymore. And this is called the post-ictal stage. You would be, in a fetal position. You would be in the baby pose, and you were there, and maybe you didn't realize it sometimes, but like you keep inching your way back to that space. So that realization for me was powerful, and I perceived the patterns of the energy through that, which was not perceivable just through looking at energy. Because when I look at energy, what some people call life force, some people call it kundalini, the patterns are random. They have subjective movements about them, which are situational. It depends on the time of the day, who is in the room, that would influence what is to happen, you know? but there are consistent patterns, and it was through this understanding of origins where things became clear. So what are the manifestations of becoming like a baby or like a child or a fetus? For one, the movements would be telling. The losing of motor control. Like sometimes the body does move like this, but then there is this intentionality within the movements of the fetus that is not just random. The fetus moves like this. um so you just watch somebody sometimes when they go into that, it's like they're floating in liquid, in like amniotic fluid, and then you want to hold the field for them so that they're safe in that womb room. But very often it's like losing control, losing motor control, letting go of motor functions so that something autonomic happens. So when people go in deep retreats or long trainings, when people lose their movement, they have to learn how to gain it back. Like I've seen so many people actually lose that control for hours or days because they're transforming, that they have to teach themselves how to gain like access to their fingers and their hands, like they were growing again as a human, as a person, or as a species. So that would be one manifestation. The greater manifestation has to do with losing language as we know it, losing speech. So you can bring this together, that some people they lose the capacity to think and speak in sequence. They light language is one. When people speak in light language, it's one, but more often than not, it would be in the group space when people are sharing. It's like uh, and then they just stay silent, and you think, okay, some people didn't see anything, but they actually can't speak. Even if they wanted to, they lost the power to define things and put things into word containers, and then to sequence those word containers so that they can explain things one word at a time. In the earlier in the day during the workshop here, someone was explaining that there was like that, like this funnels all the words so that it's like it falls one word at a time. And then she was describing how all these words are trying to compete with each other, wanting to all be spoken simultaneously, and she couldn't speak at that moment. So something happens to the language part of the brain, that it opens up and you can't sequence things anymore. So when I noticed this, I decided to look deeper into it and not just call it light language. And there were so many insights there as well. So I would literally just sit there and would talk to them when they can't talk anymore. And I would say, okay, right, tell me your name. And then they would be, um, they literally could not even speak their own name. And sometimes that is the scariest. But because it's so liberating not have to put things into a box, then they would enjoy it, not being able to talk for like an hour. They'd make a sound, or they talk to their body. And they realize the moment they go back into language is when they lose the awareness. So there's something about the invention of language that helped us to limit a lot of these connections that we were born with. It came within the womb space. In neurology, this is called priming, not pruning, because you have too many connections. You have too much sensitivity when you first come into the world. So psychologists say that by the time you're 6 years old, you would have already formed the foundations that will determine who you will become. How that is done is you need to break apart the connections that you don't need, and that's how you arrive at personality. You now you have like words belonging to your vocabulary, your style of grammar or syntax, which is how you follow the rules of language. So you're born with 100 billion neurons and you need to prune it to 80 billion and then only 70, and then now you're left with 50 billion neurons. So you actually have less now. You think you have more because you have a bigger brain, but neuronally you had more neurons when you were a baby. You had twice the number. There were so many connections that it actually looked like a chaos, and then you had to organize it. Something in inner dance actually brings you back to the brain of the baby, the brain of the toddler, or the brain of the fetus. When you experience something, it's not just because you're imagining it. It's because you're seeing what is happening to you. So when you get an image, what you're seeing is the transformation itself. Don't think that it's just an imagination thing. Very often, when something appears, it actually seems a lot more real than when your eyes are open. Somehow the dream reality seems even more real than reality itself. Did you have a dream or an inner dance experience or a Kundalini experience or life force energy experience? I have to be careful because there are different names of this in many places and I love it. Have you had a dream or an energy experience where the dream was so weird? It was a situation that is so out of the ordinary. And then when you woke up, you're like, oh, what? You know, there's a Belgian lady who's in Maya at the moment. And like, I think 3 days ago, she was in an inner dance. And then there was a situation I don't remember. And it's like, I'm talking to this person and it's a really important conversation. And it was a long conversation. And she woke up and she, oh, what? Where am I again? I'm in Maya. I'm in the Philippines. I'm in Palawan. And the moment it flips, you lose that. But what she remembered was she was so sure that she was not in this wooden floor in Southeast Asia in the middle of the forest, that she was in the city talking to this person. So there's something about the dream. There's a single-minded persistence in the dream that is not as clear as when you're awake. When you're awake, you're actually more confused. When you're in that dream state, the REM state, when you're in that situation, there's something that seems a lot more real than reality itself. Some of the colors are more vivid or vibrant, and you don't dare question. It could be the weirdest thing, you could be flying, you could be suddenly some kind of doctor or Olympic athlete in a certain situation, and when you're there, it seems more real than reality. So that's what we had to let go of. So we think now we're in reality, but reality is actually less real. So to establish the brain state of the baby, you need to change a few things. So regression is a really good word, actually. Like, we're not just progressing, we're actually regressing, because to regress is in fact more progress. That we were more advanced in the beginning or in the origins, and the more we got smarter, the less wise we became. I don't know if that makes sense to you. But this is what it is. This is what you're holding. This is the nature of the work. You're going to bring people back to the original state. You're not just pulling people, you're actually pulling them back into the conditions of possibility that existed in the womb. So once you get past this, if you bring this into observation, and if you allow this insight into your field, if you start to honor it, then you would see the structures it would provide you. It would be that which allows you to hold the complexity later. Okay, so what are the mechanisms of this? Let me prepare my notebook. I don't know if I would repeat some things that were shared before, but to speak this in a linear way is good within context. Okay, so wait, sorry. Okay, so it's working. So if this is your brain,
an echo on your voice.
There's an echo, right? Okay. Wait. Yeah, I wasn't sure why. Let's see. Okay, maybe.
It's
Is
each time that you're sharing something.
Yeah, it's true. Ah, okay. Why don't I take this out? Yeah, okay. So it's better now, I guess. All right. So let's say this is the brain. What you normally do when inner dance first comes alive is you send a lot of activations here. You create connections between the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. So the name for this is the corpus callosum. This is worth learning, this term, so that people think that there's only one brain, but there's two, right? They're separate and they're conjoined by these very small fibers called the corpus callosum. Okay, so spiritual people, artistic people, musicians, they have a thicker corpus callosum. And the thicker it is, the more connections you have. So what we do in the work is to thicken this. And the way to thicken this is to allow electricity to pass through this field. So when certain things start to happen in the body, you know, like sensations, movements, visions, it's primarily because electricity is beginning to spread across the whole brain, and it initially fires up in the corpus callosum, and then they start to travel through different regions, different lobes in the brain, through, let's say, the brain stem, and then the frontal, the occipital at the back, the parietal, and the temporal lobes, and so on and so forth. So this is partly responsible for bringing about the baby brain. The baby brain doesn't have filters. There's a lot of electricity passing through the corpus callosum, and how you begin to limit that is this: when you especially learn language, what then happens is you lateralize the brain so that music exists here in the right, simultaneous thought exists in the right, where everything's happening all at once. The chaos is here, and the order is here, where things can happen in a sequence. So you're able to do that by learning language. When you learn to think one word at a time, then you lateralize the brain, and you start to limit the amount of electricity that can pass through both hemispheres. So even simply asking someone to lay down, using most kinds of music, asking someone to close the eyes, already that creates a trigger mechanism that allows the electricity to pass through both sides. In other words, because this is lateralized, the left and the right aren't always talking to each other. They're not friends. So what happens when you co-activate them, they start to talk to each other. They begin to communicate. So okay, sorry, let's go back to that. It's really good to visualize. So once you do that, once you start to send electricity through the corpus callosum, there are different effects that begin to happen. Let's clean this up more. There are certain parts of the brain that are responsible for different things. So this doesn't need to be exact, but in the left brain, when someone starts to do something like light language, or when someone loses speech so that they can talk, like I was describing it. When you go into the womb space, it's really hard to talk, to be honest. It's because when you send the electricity through the corpus callosum, there's a part of the brain that's very, very near the corpus callosum, and this is called the Broca's area. Okay, now the Broca's area is responsible for speech production. It's responsible for allowing you to speak the words that you would speak. The Broca's area holds that. Now, when you send a lot of light through the Broca's area, what you're doing is you're washing patterns of thought, patterns of speech with light, so that a lot of these patterns actually get destroyed momentarily. Okay, like your like your habits, your reactions, your response mechanisms, you lose them, and that's partially what it means to become like a baby. When you lose these arguments, these egoic modalities of the mind, you literally go back to the beginning, the fresh slate, the blank page. It's like people just would word, okay, I'm empty. It's like I'm not thinking. I'm empty. A big reason for that is because the Broca's area is getting washed. Like, so much of our pain actually exists because we're trying to argue too much. We're listening to someone, and then no, we're trying to respond in a way that's according to our identifications, our needs, desires, and intentions. But when we lose our Broca's area, there's a disorder, okay, that comes up in the brain, and the name for that is there's a name for that. The name is aphasia. Okay, aphasia is a condition where someone loses language, and in the West, this is perceived as an illness or a disease, but in the East, like in India and other places, it's actually seen as part of a spiritual awakening. Like many people who meditate, who do yoga, who go into shamanism, one of the manifestations is that they lose their language for like a day or a week. So this is another topic to bring up. I've been holding the space for a long time, for so many years, and really early on, when I saw the most powerful experiences, sometimes people would go into a journey that would last for 3 hours or 5 hours. They wouldn't break. They would just be there. And then when they come back, when I tried to talk to them, they would respond like through this. And it seemed like they can't speak, but they actually have more answers to yeah, thank you, Mimi. Yeah, they talk like babies. What Mimi wrote is she's seen people babble like babies after an awakening. Why is that? So that's interesting, right? Now, baby talk isn't just baby talk. Start another page. Babies utter, when we talk, words are made up of basic sounds. W, O, R, D, S. Those aren't just letters in the alphabet. Those are called phonemes. Okay, everything that you speak is made up not just of words, but of basic sounds called phonemes. Now, babies, when they do baby talk, what happens is they utter, no, not here, they utter the 800 phonemes that make up every single language on earth. Okay, so I don't know how many languages you have. Many Europeans have more than one or two. So your mind is wired in accordance to what you've learned, absorbed based on what you were exposed to when you were young. Babies don't have that. They haven't pruned, they haven't limited. So they basically speak what's called a universal language. So baby talk is actually universal language. So light language is the language of everything and everyone before you limit it to Dutch, to Japanese, to that's partly what it means to become a baby. So when you wash the brain's corpus callosum and Broca's area, what would happen possibly is aphasia. It's aphasia. You would have aphasia. Now, aphasia is a very, very interesting thing in inner dance. Our point is not exactly to make people lose their language. People actually gain it immensely later on when they rediscover language. Language would have changed. Language is important not just because it's how we speak. Language is how consciousness organizes the unconscious. This is something out of psychology, anthropology, and structuralism. Language structures the unconscious. It organizes the mind. So when you lose language as you normally experience it, what you're losing is the current organization of the mind, so that you could possibly, if you were lucky enough, reorganize it to say, okay, I'm not happy with the organization. I need to destroy it. I need a little bit more chaos. So you would move things around and you place this thing there and place that thing there. Not in a sequential way, but at the same time, because you do have these hundreds of billions, like hundreds of billions of neurons. How exactly do you rewire that? It's not going to be logical in approach, because you can't really track how hundreds of billions of neurons are going to be changing. But it's happening through neuroplasticity. So language, in a way, is what helps to organize thought. Language organizes memory. Language is also very connected to how your body moves. So when you look back at the mapping, screwing this up. The Broca's area is very near, let's say, the nucleus accumbens. This is the part of the body that facilitates your dance or your movement. So this is very interesting. When you send light and when you activate the corpus callosum, because the nucleus accumbens is quite near the corpus callosum as well, the Broca's area and the nucleus accumbens are very linked to each other. In other words, your speech and your action, okay, your dance, the way you move your body and the way you talk is actually interlinked. So if you try to imagine something and then speak it without accessing your power to imagine like space and how things relate to each other, you can't do it. The way you arrive at words is through initially the way you move your body. Okay, this is really important. But before the 3-year-old or 4-year-old starts to speak, they have to freely move their body across the room. They have to play, they have to start using their body. And then all of the bodily experiences allows for the translation of all of these sensations, like the things that they're seeing, the things that they're touching, but most especially the movement. The movement has a role of organizing, like vision, like sound, sound, light, electricity, magnetism, heat, pain, pleasure. A lot of that needs to organize. And initially, the language of the body is the dance, the movement, which is the freedom to move across the space. So the more you do that, you would start to establish memory. Okay, so if I move from this room to that room, there's a difference, so that there's here and then there's there. And then the more you traverse through time, okay, certain things happened yesterday, so yesterday is not today. The baby actually needs to create a library that we call memory, so we can place yesterday into a shelf as opposed to last week and last month, which is a lot more complex because a specific day isn't really just a day. There are repetition cycles within the day that are similar to the day before. So when you achieve those patterns, language becomes possible. So you need to understand what it means to lose language. It is to disorganize the library that allows you to remember the past. So if you're tired of the memory, if you're looping, say, okay, it's always that trauma, it's always that emotion of anger. If I'm tired of that, to let go of it, you actually need to reorganize the system, because when the system gets rigid, like language is one of the things that gets rigid, and language is directly connected to how the body is positioned and how the body moves. So then when the body begins to move in a different way, the language also happens in a different way. Like inner dance started in 2007, 2008. And around this time, light language was becoming a thing globally as well. A lot of it started in Australia, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and then the US. Inner dance was also starting at that time. And what was interesting is the people who were going into the light language process, when they would, speak in this baby gibberish, their bodies would move. And it was incredible. And then when you observe the people who were going into the inner dance, it was also the same. People were beginning to talk like light language. You don't need to tell them this could happen. In Kuala Lumpur, in Singapore, in Taipei, in Korea, people were just speaking like this. It was incredible. So, it seemed like there was this direct relation, that there's this inner language and this inner dance. And when change happens, they both undergo these activations that keeps allowing like a further spread. So yeah, back to aphasia then. I've seen people lose their language for like months. One lady even lost it for years. But as she lost something, she was gaining something. They became really wise beings. So why we study aphasia is not to make it happen. It happens if it happens. The reason why we study is it has structures. There is an aphasia that happens more in the left brain, and then there's an aphasia that happens in the right brain. So when you start thinking about certain things, like for example, music, when you conduct music, it's not just about like chaos and order. Music, like language, happens in two quadrants. There's space and there's time. So when you go through music, there's something very, very similar in language and music that's to do with space and time. So if it's not just music, let's say if it's language, when you speak, you have to choose the right words. You remember like the funnel. that lady was describing earlier here in Maya. It's like you have all these things inside your vocabulary. And these are all the words, the concepts, the ideas, the thoughts that you have. And when you speak, you need to choose just one. And then you would sequence that one after another, right? So that's how you speak. To be understood, you would say, okay, the cat ate the mouse or something, one word at a time. Music is the same. Music doesn't make sense if everything just, let's say this opens up and everything just fell down all at the same time, like if music didn't have a story and if music just, from beginning to end, everything just was a chaos. That's not music as we know it anymore. Music as it evolved over time. So music is changing now, just like language is changing. So light language is the opening of that floodgate so that all of the meanings start to fall down all at the same time on all the sides. In music, that's why there is some kind of chaos as well. Like because in the womb space, everything was going on. Maybe it's not tears, maybe it's beyond even this line. Everything's just like a chaos happening. So in the beginning, when you expose children to music, the like 1-year-olds don't recognize rhythm. They can't follow a beat because they haven't learned to sequence the brain yet. Rhythm organizes time, and babies don't live in time. Babies still don't have the conceptualization of yesterday as opposed to tomorrow. This is something that arrives more specifically at 2 years old and 3 years old, when they're toddlers already. But babies don't really have that differentiation, and the brain doesn't have that as well. So even if the baby wanted to, because they haven't gone through the developmental mechanisms, so yeah, you're doing that in reverse. You're destroying that system in the adult so that they become like the baby. So we're interested in aphasia because there are structures. There's structures there, and you can structure your music in that way. So you have a choice either to allow music to unravel in time, and this is how we used to do it in inner dance a long time ago. Started to change that after 2018. Or music could also just be something that happens all at once in space. So this is going to be a little bit hard to describe because most people who are conducting the work right now, they're using music that happens one at a time. And the evolution in inner dance, where everything started to happen all at once, this took place over, like 5 or 6 years because of our observations on, okay, what happens when music is time oriented? It's discursive, it's one at a time, as opposed to music that is all at once. There are structures there, and those structures belong within the human brain itself. So when you look at aphasia, there are 2 types of aphasia. It could be aphasia based in code and aphasia based in context. So let me give examples of that. Like when people experience code aphasia, whether it be through inner dance, the energy, whether it be through like an accident or a spiritual awakening, code aphasia would be like this. Let's say you were trying to explain something, but you you can't. So rather than just light language, like the first aphasia patient that was studied was by Paul Broca himself, the one who founded the Broca's area. He had a patient, and his name was Tan. And every time Tan would try to share something, say you ask him, okay, what time is it now? How are you doing? How's the weather? What do you want to eat today? The answer of Tan to all of those questions is Tan. So Tan wasn't actually his name. but all of the doctors called him Tan because something happened to his brain. So every time he wanted to bring something in representation, the only verbal placeholder he could come up with was that one word. So when you hold the energy, when you hold more space, it could happen that people lose this funnel system, okay, that allows many, many, many words to just become one word. So then people start living in what's called code. Now, what's different with the other aphasia, it's called context aphasia, is this. So instead of people losing the ability to say just to be limited to just one word, often something weird would happen where they would say a lot of words, but they lose the power to combine them correctly. So I don't know if you watch Star Wars, but there's this character in Star Wars who's kind of context aphasic, and yet he's the smartest being in the universe. You know, he's a Jedi. He's kind of small. He's colored green. I don't know if you know Yoda, but Yoda speaks strange. What happens is sentences construct tri-C2 arrangement and combinations of gets chaos weird. You know, like he doesn't know how to order the prepositions, the you know, he doesn't conjugate. So there are people who go so deep in the energy that they lose the power to combine things well. So this is the explanation on why light language happens. When you experience light language, what takes place is, let's say, music. Instead of saying music, you might say this, or you might say that. You know, what you're doing is you're taking the current arrangement between the letters and you're changing the sequence. So instead of like a problem in space, there's a problem in time. So that instead of following the sequence like this, when we talk about regression, what takes place is this goes there, and then that goes there, and then this goes here. And you know, you're doing something to time. You're doing something weird to time. We had a big, really interesting discussion here, and I'll open the space if you can relate to this experience. So we have a Portuguese lady here who now lives in Brazil and is visiting us for the month. And she had this experience in her first ayahuasca journey. You know, ask you if you ever had this. So her body began to move in her ayahuasca. And then there was so much energy and so much power and awareness that was there when she was discovering this inner dance in her journey. And then as soon as she started to think, okay, oh, wow, this is really cool. What is that? When analysis would come in, then she would lose. Her body would drop and, oh, no, I lost it. So when she lets go of her mind, suddenly like her body moves again. So when that happens, there's something interesting taking place in relation between the inside and the outside. You become aware of something about the room, how you're experiencing the people, the music, the events in the room. So I want to ask, did this happen to you either in a psychedelic journey, an inner dance, a kundalini, a life force energy thing? And what was it like? What was it about that movement that was very particular? Okay, so Ines said that she started singing, which is a kind of movement. Anyone else? And we'll get back to you, Shamaraya, on the different light languages. Okay, so yeah,
Yeah, me.
go ahead. Mimi.
Um, I experienced a lot of movement with my hands wanting to do really specific positions, and it, it was really weird because like when my mind would turn on and try to analyze, I'd go back to shaking. But when I would just be in the flow, my hands would really flow. It was almost like I felt like the energy would be disorganized when I would think, but when I would just relax and relax into the flow, it would like be like the energy was organized into a movement.
Yeah, like synchronized, organized. Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Mimi.
Yeah.
Anyone else wants to add some texture to this? Okay, so let me just texturize it from the global space. Also from my personal space. Before I lived in the island, I experienced my first inner dance actually in 2002. And that was when I took magic mushrooms for the first time. I was young. I was very young. I was 22, 23 years old. Back then, I had that experience with a Mexican stranger in California. So already time and space were kind of weird on me. So when it happened, it opened something up in me. When it first happened, my body moved and I went into a dance. It's not, like coordinated like this. It was like a wild dance where I was like, it was really strong. And what I noticed when I was there, where I lost control, my body was entirely moving in its own. Like I couldn't hurt anyone. I couldn't hurt myself, even though it was really wild. I would be, bouncing around, tumbling, doing these martial arts movements, and then dancing. And then I noticed something really particular, which should become very important later on. I realized that I knew what was going to happen in the music right before it changed. And this was maybe for as long as 30 minutes. And in that zone, 30 minutes is not 30 minutes. It's a long time. So it led me to questioning like who is causing what? Because if I know what's going to happen in the music before it happens, it could be like a minute before or seconds before. Who is actually controlling what? Because normally in your normal awareness, you're being controlled by the music. But in this case, I somehow felt that I'm in control. But going to what Mimi was saying, the moment I was thinking, which is when I'm trying to control through my thought and my language, and thus the way we normally move, which is in control, I would lose control. I would gain control the way I normally am controlling things, but I would lose the control where something is controlling me that was outside my mind's normal control mechanisms. So there are two things there. One is about control, where the outside isn't controlling you. You start to control the room. It's like I can manifest this reality from inside based on how I'm vibrating. The second has to do with time. Okay. Yeah. It has something to do with time. And this probably was brought up in the prior Zoom call, but now it's more important to even talk about. So when we talk about regression, there is a concept within science that is very important in this regard. It's called retrocausality. So retrocausality is the opposite of causality. Causality is cause and effect, where usually in a causal universe, one takes place after another. So when this happens, this is number one, and this is two, number three, four, and so on and so forth, let's say 10. In a retrocausal universe, 10 happens, and then number one would appear. So time starts to go like backwards. But you are able to reverse time. There's something about this energy that allows you to reverse time. So let's say when you're thinking about, okay, how does the mind work? Normally when I ask a question, then I might find the answer. Now, when you tap into intuition, it's usually the opposite. So the answers come even before the questions appear. All right. It's like, I don't know why I have to do this, but it's going to get done. I don't know why I need to talk to you. I don't know why I need to travel there. When my mind is not analyzing, I just go because there's something much bigger than what my mind can handle that the body seems to know. So the body can tap somehow into time that that is a bigger mind. So when you say it's not about the mind, actually don't cancel out the mind. There's a mind that exists not in time, but actually in, where's my pen? It exists actually in space. So either mind can be that which unravels in time or mind that unravels in space. So when you begin to account for that, let's take out the music part. It's messy. Either through music or language or thought, when you're holding more here, this is that body awareness that's not sequencing things. So when you experience retrocausality, it's because you're accessing this a lot more. And when you turn that on in the body, these manifestations that belong to inner dance is very particular. So yeah, like why am I talking about all these? Yeah, they will help to formulate what aphasia is about. Aphasia has something to do with retrocausality. When, for example, some people enter a coma or have a stroke or have a certain brain disorder, either through an accident or sickness, when they go to that place and then you try to speak to them later, people who died and came back, they have a very different experience of Earth. They would say like, oh wow, wait, there were beings, there was like this inception, there's this interstellar universe, there's this Doctor Strange space, there's this dreamland. And then the moment you went back to normal and people start to speak again, boom, like you're back in time. But when you're in space, it's like this. And a lot of people who do experience those disorders, they lose control of their body. So inner dance can be really helpful when you work with people who had stroke or have dementia or Alzheimer's, because they're actually beginning to go to those places. They're visiting those realms already. They're not just in this linguistic, verbal, linear space. They're going into those areas. So this is naturally occurring. This is what's happening now. So you have these choices then, like going back to music. If you construct music that's based in time, you will get certain effects. What's in that? Why would we hold sequential music, one song after another? Okay, the effects of that would be this. Number one, there would be emotions. People might cry. There would be a lot of sensations. There would be what? There would be yeah, there would be body movement. The body would move. It would go into these spasms. It would go into the mudras. This is based on sequential music. Now, when you start holding music that holds more space than time, these are the manifestations. or maybe let's just talk about one. A lot of people might in the beginning feel like they're passing out, like they're sleeping. But those who realize they're not sleeping, what happens is they start to travel through dimensions. And that could be either the womb, that could be the earth. Okay, so time-based musical and energetic techniques bring about very, very personal experiences. You know, they would have these memories of when they were children, mostly, okay, or you know, like traumatic elements, and they would be able to look at that, like fear. And when you hold more space, the experiences tend to be more like global or cosmic. You know, people would talk more about the universe. So this is your choice. If music is pretty much like the normal wave, and that's in relation to the circadian rhythms talk that we had in the last Zoom meeting that we had. When music tends to be more like flat, like having deep delta, but having very high gamma state, not having the more obvious beta, alpha, more like beta and alpha waves. This is what would tend to happen. So when you look at the womb room as like a model, or the whale song, the online journeys I've been conducting is more a combination of this one and this one. Okay, so maybe to help you visualize what I mean, let me share some sounds with you. So try to put on my phone. I'm gonna do a shared screen on my iPhone. Okay. so I'll stop the screen and go back to this. Why is there an echo? Is there an echo? Ah, it's because the share sound option is there. Okay, so what I showed to you was the noise app, and many facilitators in the world are using just this. They're not really using Spotify or DJ apps. There are places in the world, like in Finland, there are some communities in Belgium or in the UK or in Spain that started to experiment with this. And what it really means is to hold more space than time. Okay, let's see how much we can clean this up. And what happened was that these facilitators realized that there was a choice. There's a choice point to either allow the personal or the cosmic to arise. Maybe it's better to have both, like for sure. So in those communities, the realization is that body movement is not always important. It's not always the goal. And for many people who are very much into sequencing things in a way that there's jumps between like slow and fast and this and that, body movement is really, really important. So the way things are termed, you know, like in terms of activation or kundalini, it's all about like the sensations or the emotions or the mudras or the kriyas. For those who decided to just go ahead and hold more space and time, the key was how to allow people to travel through dimensions. So, for example, like right now, we have these guests from Spain, from many places, and the experience normally is when they first come here on the first day, and then the second day, and the third day, and the fourth day, the body's moving a lot, and then people are crying, and the body is moving a lot. You know, the spine does the thing, and then the body's moving a lot. But later on, the body isn't moving so much until the point that they're not moving anymore. And then when the body was moving, they come away with, yeah, it moved a lot. And then and then what? Well, it just moved a lot. And then I had a lot of energy. And then the question is, and then what? So what? And well, there was so much energy and it moved a lot. And then what? ... As they start to let go of the physical movement, and as they, you know, from time to space, as they move into space, what takes place is more like, okay, I went there. I went to that space. I went to the womb. I went to the, I went somewhere. And then, you know, because they stay here for weeks, and then, oh, I saw it. I actually saw it. I saw what I wasn't looking at, but which I'm always looking at. So images for one start to appear. And then inside, what is insight? Insight is when the images start to connect, so that you start to see the connections in terms of the network of thought, of consciousness, of ideas. You start to see the big picture. So that when the movements aren't happening so much, and then we ask, and then what? They actually have an answer to it. And they're like, I realize, or I see, you know. So space means that. Space means to be able to hold a lot more information. And when you hold something like noises, like layering noises one after another, and here we more or less layer noise, effects, and it seems chaotic at times, because we're sensing how slowing down and going fast can help to settle, until such time that everything just flattens to a point where people just are, and then they go into the dimension. That's something for you to discover on your own. if you want or need help with the noise app, just ask, and then like we can look into that. I can help you personally to access it. This is what it entirely looks like in its entirety. Wait, without having to press any sounds. So the right. Okay, yeah, just making a noise. This is how many there are, and we've used so many of these each. So you can basically put 5 on top of each other, and the thing is, we sometimes have 3 devices in a space within a multi-speaker system. So we would position the speakers so that some would move around, some would be fixed. And then if we had 3 devices, let's say 2 iPhones and 1 iPad, or 2 iPads or 3 iPads, 2 iPads and 1 iPhone, what would happen is we can layer 15 noises one after another. Okay, so that's how many there are. I don't know if there's more I haven't downloaded yet. And we've studied how each of these create certain effects. And so that's what happens. Like Maya acts as a kind of recovery center, so that when they've experienced so many of the movements, at some point you actually need to just start digesting all of these things that have arisen and have emerged. You know, how do you bring about a convergence and not just an emergence? So that's an evolutionary line in inner dance, like starting in 2019, when we started to create these like womb room type tracks. What happened was, globally, where people were used to the activations of the movement and the catharsis, the kriyas, the emotions, there was a shock. What happened was, some people were so not used to it that they're like, "Oh, this is weird, this is chaotic." And then there were people who just dropped in. They were like, "Oh, wait, I went there." And so facilitators were actually kind of, so this is what you as a facilitator will have to go through, because if you belong to a certain community that is holding a certain vibratory technique, some of the trepidation in holding the chaos belongs to, okay, maybe people won't be ready for that, not just me. When you're going through it, some part of you's analyzing, okay, but if I then do this, what would happen to others? So historically, over the years, these histories are some things that come up in a lot of them, so that sometimes there's more time, and then sometimes there's more space, and then sometimes space and time start to converge with each other. And sometimes the difference is in the contrast. So for example, we have musicians here, and we've been using these apps for weeks now, and then we decided, okay, let's just play the guitar and have someone singing in the background. You know, the one from Colombia was doing the guitar, Oscar, and then you know, the one from Belgium, she's got this amazing voice, and then I was just getting these objects and making sounds. People went super duper duper deep, and they were shocked because we were purely in analog today. But a lot of that was made possible because of the initial waves that we have set before. So in Maya, what we do is we at least introduce people to the different historicities of the sound, because a lot of these sounds are reflections and remembrances of different eras in the history of mankind and our brain. Like you can go either into the prehistoric, the medieval, you can go into the Neolithic, the Paleolithic, all of these have vibrations. Then you can go into the beginning of oral tradition, into reading, writing on parchment. All of these have mediumships. All of them have space-time disruptions and continuities. And then you could go into internet-based thought, a lot of which is what's being used right now. So when you study oscillations, when you study the range of possibilities again and again, this is really what you would end up with, that your choice in music would either hold, sorry, there's previous writing. I was using this for a Zoom call yesterday or the day before. So music either operates like here would be, okay, the standard cathartic music would be like this. But when you start holding more interdimensional space, you would hold more gamma hiding within delta. The current online sessions I've been holding are mixed, but I am creating conditions where people can drop in more and more to delta and gamma and high oscillating frequencies. But en route to there, I still need to hold like some of this. But the noise app is mostly like holding this right here and this here. So I would need to explain more about this for this to become understandable. Okay. So not only should we talk about aphasia in terms of the brains, in terms of brain structures, to understand what's happening in the nervous system, where the patterns would be seen. If you're going to be interested in energy, energy is that which destroys patterns, that deconstructs patterns. But if you are interested in consistencies, not just the intuitive where you can make things up as you go along forever, the brain and the central nervous system, which is the spine, and then the neurons or nerves that flow from the spine in and out, afferent and efferent neurons, that's where the patterns would be seen. So in terms of the brain, based on what we do now that we've talked about the corpus callosum, aphasia is actually a byproduct of something else. Before you get aphasia, the other disorder that has been important in science that reveal the patterns is actually epilepsy. Okay, now epilepsy is not just a sickness; it's the sacred disease. In ancient cultures like India, epilepsy was seen as a symptom of the awakening process. Some people didn't just see it as like a good sacred, like when the epilepsy would come, people would say, oh, that's like a demonic possession or an evil spirit is coming into the body. So we haven't yet understood the nature of electricity as it surges through our system. Nowadays, we do know that when electricity passes through the corpus callosum, right? Corpus callosum. When electricity passes through the corpus callosum, seizures would happen, spasms, the body would shake, the body would move on its own, visions would appear, in the form of what's called auras, and people would lose control of the body. And then people would go into altered states of awareness. So when you study epilepsy, all of these things that happen in inner dance also takes place in some special brains that have thicker corpus callosums and have highly sensitized mechanisms that activate the amygdala, or the not the Broca's area, but let's say the hippocampus, or the nucleus accumbens, or the striatum. So epilepsy is not just a sickness, it's actually a possible correlation to genius. Some of the most important men and women who changed the world had epilepsy, and this includes Einstein, Aristotle, Alexander the Great, Joan of Arc, Leonardo da Vinci, Elton John, Fyodor Dostoevsky. A lot of these people experience these symptoms that are taking place in the Kundalini process or the inner dance. The exact same thing that's happening. It was happening to them. So it seems like when people access the brain through electricity surges, there's wisdom. There's an ability to perceive connections that were not perceivable through logic, because there's like a wider spread. Epilepsy is not just important because it could be correlated to high intelligence. To understand it, some of the most highly intelligent people who changed the world were experienced electricity in this way that you're searching. It's also that we've been scared of epilepsy for a long time. Why is that? Especially because, not so much because of this, but it's because of this. The greatest fear in most humans is to lose control. So when you do the work, the kind of work that we do, you're actually allowing people to lose control of their bodies, and then something takes over. So epilepsy is actually something you're inducing in the person. If you know that sound especially induces epilepsy, sound induces synchronization of electricity that spreads through large regions of the brain. Okay, it could be like smaller regions. It could be like the left hemisphere frontal lobe, or it could be both hemispheres frontal lobe, or it could be like occipital lobe epilepsy. It could be parietal lobe or temporal lobe epilepsy, all of which determine whether the body would move on its own, visions appear, or emotions arise, or people remember certain things, or that people would feel electricity passing through their body. Okay, all of these are regions of the brain. So it's actually possible. Okay, this is what I want to share with you. It's actually possible to watch a person having a symptom. Okay, so let's say it's the body moving. Let's say it's the right arm moving, or the left arm, or let's say they're crying, or let's say they're speaking light language, or they are they're screaming super duper loud, or they're remembering their childhood. It's actually possible to know what part of the brain is being activated. You can map out where the energy is happening based on the feedback that's being related. So instead of just sitting there watching the room and just hoping that something would happen, you can actually determine what the experience would be, so that it would either just be, okay, the body's moving, and then what? There's a way to spread the electricity surge so that they would start to see what they're not looking at, or that they would make connections in the semantic, echoic, and iconic network that wasn't happening before. So this is the nature of maps here in the work that we do. That when you, it's beginning to look messy again. Let's clean things up. Okay, let's see how much. Okay, when you use sound, there would be surges for sure. When you ask people to lay down, and when you use music, you will activate the surge. Now, the difference here is more on where would you like the surge to appear, the surge of electricity, you know, and it's based again on your intention. Do you want them to move? Do you want them to cry? Do you want them to perceive? You know, do you want them to see visions? Would you like them to get to know themselves in the big picture perspective? What's your goal? Like, what's your point? You know, why are they there in the room? Is it because they are there to know the true nature of themselves as cosmic beings? So depending on the goal, your style, your technique, intuitively found out, would be regularized. It would be made consistent. So a lot of the people who prefer movement, you know, it's all about the movement. So many trainers would say, if your body's not moving, you're blocked. And they just keep repeating that. A lot of the music that they would use would be very much like directed here, like the frontal lobe, because this is what facilitates a lot of movement, intention, and control. So when people are really interested in getting people to perceive colors, visions, vibrations, the style of the music would be here. Okay, so this is the frontal lobe. So certain ways of holding people. Let's say when you keep pressing on like this body part, like the abdomen, the solar plexus, the yellow chakra, a lot of activations would happen in the frontal lobe, because when you press on the adrenal cortex, what's happening is you activate the sympathetic nervous system in such a way that there would be these stress response mechanisms. So fear would become like a sensation of power, because epinephrine and cortisol would be severely activated alongside with dopamine rushes in the brain. So when you press here on the abdomen, a lot of that would activate frontal lobe type of experiences. And that's when the body starts to shake, undergo spasms, and then start to move. Well, when the greater movements do happen, it means that there's primarily like a greater spread towards the top and the back of the head. But primarily when it's just the spasms and you're focusing too much on the solar plexus, that somewhere beneath the chest and the solar plexus, the spread will be here. And yeah, so there, that's called a focalized seizure. It's like a focalized epilepsy, because you see there are these different types. It's pre-colored, so sorry about that. It's either you experienced a generalized spreading of energy or a focalized spread. Okay, these are the two main difference. It's either the activation is going to be happening on just one part. Okay, let's say, okay, I feel nauseous, I feel like a headache is happening. Usually that's a focalized seizure. And then when the nausea is coming more and more, there's actually a movement from a focalized to a generalized spread. So more and more the energy starts to spread across a greater region in the brain. Let's see if there are other brain maps here. I'm not sure. Here's another example of like different types of seizures. Like when you look at the brain waves that are at work, these are more consistent delta gamma frequencies, and these are like theta beta frequencies. Okay, so your goal basically is to allow for this to happen. And let's look for a darker pen. Maybe thicken it a little bit. Yeah. So yeah, your possible interest, if that was an interest for you, is to learn, and this is how inner dance mainly functions. You know, in the beginning, you experience the first stages. Okay, the body's moving in its own. That's cool. and they're sensing stuff. But if you want a more integrated transformation, you'd actually be interested in this in the long term. And based on what I'm telling you, historically, when facilitators actually moved from the focalized to the generalized activation, this could be met with resistance both from the facilitator and the participants when they first receive different types. Why? It's because the focalized spread can be very addictive. Focalized seizures, focalized activations are primarily dopaminergic. Okay, dopaminergic meaning the main neurotransmitter that's being released is this is super messy. This is our last one anyway, so you're familiar with it. It's the dopamine pathway, which as we see here is a very, very limited pathway. So when you look at this, don't mind the chaos. A lot of the activations, as you can see here, is in the frontal lobe. You see now? It's very frontal lobe focused. Okay, this is the part that's responsible for movement, for speech, language, and control, and also movement, attention, and thinking too much. And this is like the part that's responsible for emotion. This is more in the insular cortex. So in order to move the energy towards here, like the back of the head, which is the occipital lobe, this is where visions would appear. Okay. This is where people begin to see. Like somewhere in between here, this is where we begin to hear, which is generally activated anyhow because of what you're using. This is where sensations would appear, like here. This is the parietal lobe. This is basically your art. This is what you would learn in this course. So when you're focused primarily on just the movement and the solar plexus, what you're actually activating is the addiction pathway, the dopaminergic pathway, and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is very much, adrenaline, like the adrenaline rush, the hit. So when people smoke, when people take cocaine, drink coffee, activate the sympathetic nervous system, excite, arouse. It may feel good, it may feel blissful, but it could be very addictive and people will keep coming back to the process. You can make a lot of money, but at the same time, there could be eventually, after a few months, a kind of stuckness when they're not able to release certain neurotransmitters and hormones that would help to bring about the integration process. That is why epilepsy as a mapping activity actually helps. Neurologists have arrived at an understanding of how functions are mapped out in the brain, initially primarily through epilepsy. Without epilepsy, we wouldn't actually know where a lot of these functions are located. So without needing an EEG or an fMRI, with a little bit of study, you can actually read what's happening in the invisibility of this, like you don't need a machine to be able to tell, okay, it's too much of this. Let's say using that constant metaphor of the bowl or the pot that you're going to use to make soup. You would throw in the ingredients, and if you can tell just by looking at a person, okay, there's too much of this now. This is not going to help. Like this person has had enough dopamine and epinephrine. So now how about like serotonin, or how about endorphins, oxytocin, acetylcholine, noradrenaline. Okay, so you would know how to focus the slight changes in the music that would bring about like balance. Normally it takes like years for any space holder to figure this out without the mapping. Without the mapping, it would take you maybe 10 years to 15 years to figure this out. You might, this is just based on what I've observed, that there are facilitators who keep holding the same pattern. And it's not just going to be because of the space holder. When you introduce a certain way, when participants get used to some of these symptoms or phenomena or sensations, they're going to keep wanting it again and again. It's like they keep coming back, and if you don't give it to them, you know, they're not going to be okay. And if you're a people pleaser and you're wanting them to get what they want, you may not be able to give them something that they may actually need, that is responsible for a real transformation of life, not just an activation of like the dopaminergic pathway that feels amazing. It feels good. It's interesting. It leads to mystery because the body's like doing that. So yeah, there are other ways we can demonstrate the thing with music, because I've been receiving a lot of feedbacks from the last sessions that we've held, and I find them really, really interesting, where some people are headed to now, like what kind of visions are appearing, and energy manifestations are taking place. You know, maybe there would be more discussions of that later. So let me look at the time. Yeah, we spent quite a bit. Why don't we open the space for dialogue, because we still have quite a number of weeks ahead. To see if you have any questions or insights, ideas. This goes really deep, this thing. There's a lot of science to substantiate and back this, these approaches that you can use to work with parents, hospitals, schools, companies, once you break out of just a spiritual workshop, which I know some of you would be interested in, like later on. If you start working with doctors or, you know, psychiatric institutions, drug rehab centers, you would actually need the framework, so that you're not just repeating addiction cycles. If you're going to work with people in addiction, you actually need like a framework to know that you're not just gonna give them a hit, and it might lead to greater addictions in the future. So yeah, questions, anyone?
Yeah, I have a quick question about doing this with people who are recovering from addictions. I know some of the stuff because my daughter is an addict. I know that the brain initially can't make its own dopamine, and they have trouble, you know, in that part of their recovery. And is there like a specific framework that you use for addicts? Like, I would think that maybe, I don't know, I'm making the assumption that for a little bit, for a little piece of it, they need that dopamine. But then like taking them from there to like a more general, is that what's happening?
Yeah, it's interesting. Number one, you need to understand the nature of the addiction. So some people are addicted to stimulants, some are addicted to depressants, and these have psychological patterns about them. You know, like the people who are into sleeping pills and crack, ketamine, they're the ones who are escapists. They don't want to face reality. And then the ones who are addicted to stimulants, those are the ones who would rather fight it out and like go into a fight mode, you know, with a heart palpitation. So the styles for those who are into stimulants, and maybe more the addictions are with stimulants, you know. Alcohol is also an addiction, as well as coffee. Smoking is an addiction. You need to, I think you're right in a way that you would need to feed a little bit of the addiction to seduce the nervous system enough so that something familiar happens. But you don't want to give them too much. So let's say whether someone is taking a drug or not, it's actually the internal drugs that are at work. So whether you take ayahuasca or cocaine, what's actually working is the internal chemistries. The external chemistries really just send signals for the endocrine system to send out these neurotransmitters and these hormones. So when you talk about dopamine, for example, the actual hit or the blissful feeling that comes from dopamine is not actually from dopamine itself. It's from epinephrine or adrenaline, and also from cortisol. So like for example, why would people watch a horror movie, or why would they ride a roller coaster? It's because we're actually attracted to fear. When we can be afraid in those situations, it's very exhilarating because we can face death. So a lot of addicts, they when they're addicted to stimulants, they try to achieve a certain heartbeat rate that gets them high. So if you want them to get off of a certain drug, you would need them to access the high. So if they're in recovery, what takes, let's do some drawings on this, because this is really interesting. And I know some of you have been waiting for this topic to arise. Okay, so let's say, let's establish like a range. So let's say stimulants would be up here and depressants would be down here. How do you map this? So stimulants get people high, depressants get people low. So some music will get people high. Some people will slow down the heartbeat and allow people to go low, maybe in terms of vibration. So let's say, let's symbolize that as this, let's say beta versus delta. So what happens in addiction is this. There are two concepts that need to arise, one of which is tolerance. Something you're bringing up right now, Mimi, is withdrawals, which is a little bit different from tolerance. And then a lot of people, when they take medicine, especially psychedelics, what they're actually interested in is the opposite of tolerance, which is called the breakthrough. And if it's not going to be a breakthrough, it's actually going to be like an overdose. Okay, the overdose is a consequence of tolerance. So the question is, why does an overdose happen? So when you take a stimulant, your energy would rise up because you're getting the epinephrine, you're getting the dopamine. The dopamine is important for expectation and anticipation. And then when your body receives the cortisol and the epinephrine, your heartbeat would spike up, for example, and your brain waves would kind of spike up. What the body does to protect itself so that you don't get a heart attack, you don't get a heart attack, is it would send out the opposite. It would send out the opposite chemicals so that you could slow down. So your body would anticipate what your mind looks for in the opposite view. If your body knows that you're going to stimulate itself, it's going to depress you ahead of time. So even as you're receiving, your receptors are taking in adrenaline, your body had already sent out the depressing chemicals. So it's actually protected through the body's innate wisdom that tries to achieve this thing called homeostasis, which is balance. In inner dance, we're achieving homeostasis, but we're actually also breaking it so that we can find a new balance. So the reason why drug takers keep taking more and more of that drug is when the body achieves homeostasis by anticipating, if you're going to keep taking that drug, I'm going to make sure that your heart doesn't explode. So there's like this internal dance happening. people will become tolerant. So like, okay, the drug isn't doing it anymore. I need to take more. I need to take more so I can go even higher. But the more they take, the less it's actually working, because your body's anticipating this too much through its wisdom. And like, it's always there in homeostasis. I want to say for now, because this is relevant, not just in terms of drug taking, when people keep going to a spiritual workshop and want to get the high, and then they're not getting it anymore because they've gone into it for 3 months or 6 months or a year, the reason why they're not getting the hit is because of homeostasis. Because they keep anticipating dopamine and epinephrine. The body's already, they know, because the patterns are there. Every time it's in that workshop space, every time that same music is being used, the body would protect itself from experiencing too much. So there's an addiction to the spiritual workshop when people are thinking, no, I just need more. Give me a bigger music. Give me like something that is more cathartic, something that I can react to more and more. So something that needs to happen in the addiction balance and imbalance, is to it has something to do with this, Mimi. You need the user needs to access higher, like higher brain waves. These would be the brain waves already that achieves insight. And when they're addicted to, let's say, crystal meth, cocaine, whatever, they're actually reaching just higher beta in a way, and because it's still externally induced. And the reason, the way that they can reach high gamma would be through delta. High gamma would be what we're representing here anyhow. It's like insight, like not like trying to get the high as an escape mechanism, and not trying to get the high from something external, but more like getting high vibrations, but arriving at like complete understanding, like deep understanding. And that can really be achieved only through trust. So I think an understanding how the autonomic nervous system would be interesting, and inner dance is interesting because we affect the autonomic nervous system. In the beginning, maybe if someone was open to it, I would maybe create something sleep-based in the beginning, because people who are into drug taking, whether in recovery or the use proper, there's the wanting involved, and the more they want and the more they don't have, the more they want. The more their brain says no, the more it actually says yes. And say, okay, I'm gonna go on a diet, I'm gonna stop eating this. The more you tell that to your brain, the more you're actually gonna want it. So you want to feed the energy a little bit, and you want that to be consistent. If that's going to be while they're awake, what's going to happen is you might do battle with the wanting part of the brain. So how I would design it would be to create homeostatic adjustments while a person is sleeping. I would design maybe a wave that they can listen to for 2 or 3 hours. That wave would be a lot more parasympathetic. It would still need some of the sympathetic waves. I would just use the noise app, for example. I would learn how the noise app works, and then while a person is sleeping, through moderate volume, I would play it, and then just establish a feedback mechanism where in the morning it's like, okay, how do you feel? You know what would be cool and surprising, Mimi, is that they would sometimes say, okay, I feel better, but what they would later say is, I had these dreams, I had these visions, and it's like consciousness is beginning to speak to the mind, the person, the body, that's sneaking in insight. And then next thing you know, they'd be interested in this, and then you can do a session while they're awake.
Does this apply to somebody in active addiction?
Yeah, totally. It's we've done it and there's success. You know, it's easier. It's speaking to the subconscious when there's no resistance, rather than trying to go into a problem solving element. When we go into that, usually we actually hold the energy of the problem, and it's very hard to go to the root cause of the problem. You know, tapping into the subconscious is really hard. So I would work with the subconscious using inner dance as a technology, so that you can slip this in over a long period. Don't try to rush this, because it's, you know, it's pretty deep.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's work on it. And if you need personal help with this, I can help you design with particulars. Right now we can generalize, but there
Oh,
would
wow,
be,
that would be awesome.
yeah, just yeah, ask me certain questions that would help me see layers, and you can design something.
Okay, all right,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, thank you. Okay, are there questions around the other, or this or the other things that have been brought up?
Yeah, based on your experience of cases of addiction, how was the process of release those substances and addictions? Was it like, I don't know, a click? How did it happen that it was successful?
Okay, so first let's generalize. The generalized practice that's in Europe that's growing and becoming interesting is there's this interest in the use of psychedelics, like microdosing, to heal people who are addicted to especially stimulants. And the reason for that, I don't have a strong stand in that. I'm not so interested in it, because I find that that's still kind of invasive. Trying to look for the drawing. The point in that, and the use of microdosing psychedelics, is that when there's a co-activation of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, the stimulant and the depressant, people then arrive at like insight, and then hoping that people would stop using the drug that's only harboring like stimulant energy. When people then get used to balancing that out with enough depressing chemicals within a controlled setting, then yes and yes. So traditionally, people really just walked into the workshop who had addictions, and normally the basic inner dance wave already brings about that psychedelic experience. I don't know if I'm clarifying that, but there's something about the waves, so that if a person is really just used to the upper, so let's say a lot of drug taking around the world, where let's say parties are involved, like very often when people take a drug, it's often in a social setting. They don't do it alone. And then when they get used to a certain lifestyle or a habit, so let's say a certain way of partying, when you're on a stimulant energy, you don't usually take a break. So let's say when you go high, you're just high for hours until you drop. So what you would want to do is to balance the high by actually holding the low. So when people go to an inner dance process and have been experiencing the high, what they're actually craving for is to rest, but they can't. They're not getting slow wave sleep. So when they come into the session, something happens where they just like crash. They crash, and then they let go, but they still experience the high, like within the waves. So sometimes a single session can do it if they can arrive at like some memories or certain emotions that have been bottled up. So we've seen that over the years. It's hard to track because they're, like we don't see them again. So maybe that's a sign of success. It's only really in the last year where we have started working with people who are going into addiction programs, only because the science seems to be more expressible now. So in the past, it's just working with like single people. So I would just generalize it for now. People heal either after 1, after 3, after 10 sessions. And because we ran a lot of these within a retreat center setting, I guess our success rate was high because people take time out. It's not like in the city, they go to a yoga studio and they do a thing. That's a little bit more addictive because there's something about the brain that when you keep giving it a consistent pattern and then they get a certain, they get addicted to that because of the, addictive personalities are kind of addictive. When you do it from a retreat center space and people take time out, you need to kind of leave the familiar space. So you kind of need to do it out in the country, in the urban, not in urban, but in a rural setting where they're not working, they're not with the people they're normally with. When you do it in this way and then it's continuous, keep exposing them to the energy. I fully trust that most styles would actually work, because otherwise, if you're holding only one kind of energy, it's not actually this energy. If you're just holding the high without the low, we're in a different subject matter altogether. We wouldn't be in this conversation. So let's say, okay, on a weekend or a few days, you can see what happens, along with all the other elements that you can do. It's a really broad topic, so I can't really answer this. In general, just like psychedelics, as a microdosing, inner dance will help. But basically what I told Mimi, this is something that was formulated only late last year, and we don't have the data yet to fully say we've perfected the mechanism on that. Like, a lot of the feedbacks that we've been receiving is still quite recent, and we want to make sure if we're going to make a knowledge claim about it, we can substantiate. So if anyone's interested in doing experimentations and explorations, just write me and we can do design together. You just need to, or we can do it as a group here. You just need to be clear, like, what kind of addiction are you holding? And what's the duration? What is the level of engagement? Is it with the center, the institution? Is it with, alongside the psychiatrist, the doctor, or is it more casual? Then it might be easier in the latter, more difficult and complex, but more rewarding with the former. Yeah.
Thank you, Kai.
Yeah, I'm glad there's interest in this. Okay, so I just saw the messages about the app and the questions in the post, and how do you move through the different stages with the noise? Let's cover that first, and then we'll go to Paula. If I'm glad that you guys are interested in the noise app. So wait, let me do the share on. Wait, the sound isn't shared. Okay, so the question was, how do you move through the stages? Okay, so let's start it.
Proteste, Teil
on, Shalom.
สวัสดีค่ะสหายในธรณีทุกคนพวกเราในธรณีนี้ขอส่งมิตรจิตมาถึงท่านทุกคน
Okay, so yeah, there's the wave there. I'll send the link after this. Enjoy. You may not need music after this for a while anyway. It empowers you. We're Bluetooth based, so you can walk around, and when you want to change the vibration, you've got like a library, and so many layers. Hey, Paula, you raise your hand. Let's hear from you. Or I don't see your raised hand anymore. Did you have a question or an insight?
Okay, yes.
Mm.
Hello.
Mm.
Are you gonna send, no, please write down the applications for making sounds and music, because I didn't understand very well. And another question that I have, it's like, after like practicing inner dance, I've been feeling intolerance or impatient. Like, is it something that is releasing from my body? Or I have these like extreme feelings, like I feel sometimes very peaceful, and then I feel like intolerance, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're gonna have to like trust. There's a lot of changes that are happening, with or without the process. In Maya, people really go through a lot. Like people would feel weak. They would feel their brains like going through all sorts of things. And the feelings can be really intense. But when they walk out of the eco village, they're like a completely different person. So we basically would need to make a lot of space for discomfort. And I'm not speaking that just to you, to all of you, or to you, Paula. I'm speaking that in terms of how you would hold it for others. You would learn eventually that sometimes the more discomfort, or like, there is. So the impatience has something to do with learning how to slow something down. There's something that's operating that's very fast in the human brain and heartbeat and breathing patterns right now that needs to slow down. So especially if some of you might be coming from the Kundalini experience. Inner dance isn't going to be so fast. Like there's something inner dance does, especially like how I'm facilitating a lot of the online processes. It's actually designed to help slow something down that might have spiked up a little too fast. And patience has a lot to do with it, because based in Kundalini work, impatience actually is something that we see, so that when people start to operate there, you won't see the impatience. And then when you put the contrast of something slower with the fast, that's where the thing would get revealed. So holding both slow and fast, so that eventually you won't see a difference. These are energies you would want to learn to combine inside your system. Now, when you say inner dance, the things that we're doing in terms of the experience, they're not really supposed to fix problems. They're there merely as more or less like study material, so that there would be awareness of differentiations. It's really going to be up to you how you might use music and vibrations. So in terms of program, you can, let me take out the sound element in the screen share. I don't like hearing my own echo. There are many tools that could be used. There could be a virtual synths, there could be DJ applications, or there could be, let's say, DAWs. It could be something that you could use to create. Oh wait, this is weird echo. Do you hear it? Was there a sound?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So some of these programs really do give facilitators like a lot more control. So let's say this is coming in at a delta drop stage.
Do you want to know what it is? It is all around us. You can feel it when you go to work.
You're a man looking at the world through a keyhole. You've spent your whole life trying to widen that keyhole, to see more, to know more. And now, on hearing that it can be widened in ways you can't imagine, you reject the possibility.
I reject it because I do not believe in fairy tales about chakras or energy or the power of belief. There's no such thing as spirit. We are made of matter Nothing more. Just a tiny, momentary speck within a different universe.
You think too little of yourself.
Oh, you think you see through me, do you? Well, you don't. But I see through you!
For a moment, you entered the astral dimension, a place where the soul exists apart from the body. To show you just how much you don't know, open your eyes.
Okay, so there are quite a lot of facilitators in Spain, some in Belgium, yeah, that are using more this style. So a lot of our intensive trainings 2 years ago was more on conducting things in this way. And if this is interesting for you, then there are benefits in not having to create the playlist live from the comfort of your home, going back to time and space. When you can preempt the energetic structure, not while you're holding bodies, then it grants you a certain level of control. You just need to channel what the wave would be like based on your understanding of people's minds, hearts, bodies, and brains. The benefit to doing something live is something might come up that would need to be addressed. And if you can't change the vibration then and there, you would feel limited. So what some people do is to pre-program the playlist ahead of time and then to put the noise app underneath or above, like a pre-recorded system. So yeah, that's pretty much how you can gain a little bit more control over the wave and the 12 stages. I don't know if there was another question from you, Paula. I'm not sure.
Hi, these
Yeah.
feelings are afterwards, like the day after
Sorry?
or 2 days after.
The
Like
feeling,
these
yes.
feelings
Yes.
of intolerance, it's not when I'm doing inner
Yeah,
dance, it's like afterward.
I understood. Yeah, I totally understood.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's actually even better. That is a release, and that is something that happens in Maya after the sessions. So yeah, definitely stay with it. It's a really good sign. It's a weird way of putting it out there, but thank you. So we have 2 participants who have a hand raised, Shamaria, and Natalia.
Yeah, Pai, I have a small question about the light language, as this is really what is arising a lot for me in the sessions and in my surroundings. So I'm trying to find a deeper understanding, and that's why I ask you if you maybe could explain something about the differences in the light language that are arising.
Okay, so the explanations they gave provide a general understanding when I spoke about the Broca's area and the corpus callosum. Light language is basically going back to the original state of the human. So when that's happening, there are more coincidences and synchronicities. There are people who lived in Maya who experienced, we don't call it light language here, we do call it aphasia, because we can see that there's either code aphasia, which is code light language, or context aphasia, which is context light language. The difference there is code happens more in space and context happens more in time. So the thing that is spoken is not important. The actual sounds that are being made is not important. What is important is the dimension that is being entered. So you can either use this in the space that you hold, and because you're entering into that dimension where information isn't processed the same way. It's much, much deeper. It has something to do with retrocausality. So how we explain it, as it's also experienced in Maya here, it's almost like you know something happened before it happened. So I would often say something here, and then in the experience, people were seeing the thing, and then they'd be shocked, like, how did you see that? But I didn't know that they were seeing that. I just end up saying it because there are these energy lines. I don't want to be saying it for the sake of saying it. Then I'm not channeling the space. So in light language, there's a lot of retrocausality happening, where retrocausality is a kind of precognition where you know something ahead of time. It's a kind of intuition. So when you keep trusting it, you somehow feel like there's an awareness in the room. It's just weird. It's just kind of weird that it's happening. And when it's kind of new, the awareness is on the speaking of it, and like, is this okay? And there's shame because a little bit, because it's so different, and you don't know if you're going to be understood because the speaking is coming from another space. So when you're able to bring more awareness to not just you, there's let me explain it further. When you go into light language, you raised your internal vibration high, and what it actually does is it slows down the vibration outside of you so you can see it better. The shame there has to do with when you're there, the others may not, and you feel kind of like alien because you sound like an alien. So if it's in a safe context and you do it quietly, it will do something to people. It will do something to people. So do it softly, and with permission, begin energetically, ask for permission and begin to enter their field. And light language is about codes. It's about codes. Like when you slow down the vibration in the brain, the body, the mind, you translate that into words. So the energy of the words is much slower. You're dealing then with concepts and contexts. But when you bring all the contexts together, imagine like, okay, what if you've lived on Earth for a long time? Have you been exposed to all the cultures? Then you have access to the code if you had access to time and space in that way. So I feel that human beings are entering the fourth and the fifth dimension, and light language is an entry point to that. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Keep exploring it then.
I will.
Shame is not just an emotion. It's actually becoming the collective consciousness. It's beginning to absorb the planet and the minds of others. So it feels shameful because your ego is being destroyed. You're not a person anymore. So it can be a scary experience. But if the community kind of gets to hold it, we're going to become aliens. We're becoming aliens, meaning aliens just on a brain state level. When the DNA shifts, there's DNA changes. we're evolving. Humans are evolving, and light language it is a way that information transmission is taking place at a very unknown dimensionality. So I'm glad you're asking this. This might be interesting for others. Okay, so Natalia. Sorry, I think you need to. Oh, there's something with your mic. I think you're speaking, but I don't hear anything. I'm not sure others. Could be a setting. Hmm. Ah, wait, I think, no, sorry. Is it just me? Do you guys hear Natalia?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, good. Amazing. Now you can speak.
Hello. I was having two very quick questions, but now that you talk about the light language, it my attention, and I don't know. I want you to say more of. I don't know. I just got confused right now. Okay, my two questions were like, so this app, the sound, the noise app, you are making it in the moment. It's not that you can record and then put it, or
yeah, it's better that you do it in the moment. You can't record. You need maybe other apps to record. So it brings you control over the space, because when you say when you try to learn some of these like this, for example, like each of these elements have different sounds in them. So that's a sound of mom while the baby's in the belly. So what you want to do is kind of get used to it, because it should not be your mind planning things. When you know some of the basic parameters, your body will know what to do. It's like your body needs to be the one that thinks. So if you are holding people's bodies, if you're Bluetooth connected, like what facilitators do when I watch them, is they would be holding a body and then they would be switching, adding, subtracting, modifying the sound. And it's almost like a way of listening. It's like when you're holding energy, sometimes you can hear a sound that should be there, but you don't know how to create it. And so the limitation of using other people's music would be when you can hear that sound, once you press play on the music that other people made, it has to be according to the wave that the artist or the musician made it. And when, as a facilitator, because what you're more interested in is the energy, when you feel that frequency, you need the library system. You need a collection so that, and it needs to be wide enough that you can match what you're hearing or feeling with what the room could vibrate to. So especially when there's many people in the room, there's complexity there because you can hear multiple sounds. In fact, that's how the energy happens. There are many things taking place at the same time. So the noise app amongst all the other things that have been tried. You know, we've tried hundreds of ways to hold the energy. The noise app is just the most amazing way to learn to listen and then to match the vibration. So to answer your question, definitely this is for live applications. If you use it, it will liberate you from having to use other people's music. It's like a language, you know, like a sound language. I'll send a link right after this call so you guys could download. You just need to pay, I think, a small donation. It's $10, and what you get are highly expert recordings by very professional engineers that use the best recording equipment. They would go to caves, they would go underneath the ocean, and it's so rich.
Thank you so much, Pai. And also, I want to know in December, I want to go to Maya. I don't know how I can apply or in December. Like
yeah, just come. It's so far away, but
yes, I'm going. I just go like, hey, I'm here, like
yeah,
this.
good. Yeah, we're going to try to make as many rooms as possible because already people are emailing us. So we do just need to relay how many people can be absorbed in October, January, or December. So it's important to write to us ahead of time because we do have limited spaces. Amazing to see you soon.
So I just text
Italy.
with
Italy is on top of all those logistics.
Italy.
Italy. Italy. People call her Lituli, but it's Italy actually.
Okay, I just
yeah.
Italy. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, Mikhail.
Yes. Hello. Yes, the app is nice. I looked it up already. I'm definitely going to use it, I think. On the other hand, mixing music is also something. Thinking about making a playlist, on one hand, there is a lot of brainwave music, but that's just sounds from something. And on the other hand, I ask myself, you're talking about going into the music, going to delta or alpha, and to match that with music I know and are regularly played. The bridge in between that, it's not so clear yet.
What's your system? Do you do a DJ app, or are you on a DAW, or are you on synthesizers? What do you use?
Yes, I have. Normally, I play with Tractor.
Yeah, okay.
I've been playing with Pirato before, but Tractor is better, I think.
Okay.
Beside of that, I'm mixed already with Nuendo and all types of
Okay, so my advice to music producers and DJs is this: you would want a variety or a certain range. The reason why I use synthesizers is it allows me to experiment with different waveforms, the triangle, square, and then the velocities or frequency, amplitude. It gives me greater control. So I do like having hardware with me because I like knobs and I don't like screens so much.
Yeah,
but
I was thinking about using this also.
The
small one.
I guess
with Ableton. But that's to figure it out. Still figure it out.
Ableton's really the way to go. Like a lot of people are using Ableton because Ableton is a master of the many systems, so that you can use plugins. It's really just a matter of organizing the system. So let me show you my Ableton. not to confuse others, but this is the kind of system that we're working on here in Maya. So when we do trainings, we help people to organize all kinds of libraries. So Ableton is a digital audio workstation. So what I want to show you, Mikhail, is my frequencies are categorized here, so that when I open like my Delta library, I know where to get them. I don't know if there's sound. Yeah, there's sound. So I would just go shopping for what creates delta effects for me. And I have the exact same MIDI controller that you shared, that you showed, the launch key, the Novation. So let's say I need to know where my arpeggios are, or let's say the thing with the beat according to a certain BPM. Yeah, sorry, you had an input?
No, that's it.
Yeah.
But Ableton, I still have to figure it out. I did some things already, but not much. So, but yeah, that's a work in progress. Huh? Another thing that I was you were talking about how you can see where people are in the body, letting energy go, and okay, sometimes depending how they move, yeah, I can see also where if it is in the throat or in other parts. Yeah, I can see it also, but it's still a little bit blurry. So, yeah.
Let me send a document that I already posted to the group before, and it might make sense more now that we talked about the mapping, just so there would be some awareness on the, you need to start with the different lobes to understand that the parietal, the frontal lobe, all of these do different things. So the different manifestations of crying or sensing things, it depends on a lot of where the electricity is spreading. So I'll give you guys a map so you can study it in the long term. Then it would be less confusing, and later we can have deeper discussions about those. But when we're talking about certain areas in the body, like the throat or the abdomen or the hips, what you're actually seeing is more of the spine. That the nerves that extend from the heart or the abdomen or the cranium area, or this is the this is the sacral down here, and then this is the cranial nerves, and then this is the thoracic and the lumbar area. So when you're seeing something being released here, okay, it's because the nerves are being released on that area of the spine. It's not just the endocrine gland or the throat. So when you learn to hold, one thing to learn is how to hold the spine. And when you hold the spine, either you can press in the body or hold an extension of the body that talks to the spine. So for example, if you extend the arm, you can speak to the heart through the arm. So when you extend this arm, you can actually speak to the right part of the heart and the left brain. So just do that. Let's say when you're working with someone, extend this either a little bit or a lot. And then that will open the space. It will let the energy flow on one side of the body. If you wanted to synchronize in both sides, then do that. Like stretch that, or position it in a certain way that you can send signals. So that would affect the heartbeat, the brain, but it would also affect the spine. So when you're seeing a certain movement taking place in a body part, talk to all of these brain regions, get interested in that, because the different phenomenon, whether it be visions, vibrations, sensations, some people, they smell the energy, some people they can taste it, some people It's about the movement. You can get them to access a greater range, but mostly when it comes to brain regions, the technique would be through the way the body is positioned. You know, reposition the arms. Just keep experimenting with that. What it does when you move the arms a little bit, even what happens to the spasms or the movements, and then move the legs a little bit, open things up that seem closed. But then when you master the music and you know how to make it rise and fall, that's what would create the range of activations that would spread out through these. This is not supposed to be clear yet entirely as a structure for any of you, for most of you. When you learn a new language or a new system, you just need to be exposed. And us talking about it now, what is supposed to happen is either you've noticed certain things before and then something lights up and you say, oh, okay, I've seen that before. That's familiar. Then that can build a connection for you to work on later. But the way to learn a lot of this is really through repetition. Because really, if you want to work in people and you want to learn the system, you can't just work in music without understanding how the brain works. Because when you pick up an app, the app is actually this is the app. You know, you can't just pick up an iPad and an iPhone or a MacBook or, you know, a Windows computer thinking that what you're learning is the app. No, what you're learning is the brain. The app is a tool that accesses the brain, because we understand now how entrainment works, that stimuli from the outside has internal effects on the autonomic nervous system, bringing about response mechanisms that trigger fear, trigger trust, trigger release, trigger activation, so that people can look at the things that they're afraid of that are hard to look at. When we establish that, then we would look at the tools and the theories both at the same time. Because really, if we have a theory and we can't apply it, then it doesn't work. If we have an application and there's no understanding being given, you know, people are just told, okay, do this, but you don't have to understand why that is. That doesn't work as well. So I think we want to learn the tools in direct conjunction with the theories and the philosophies that are quite coherent. There has to be a correspondence between what we're learning about the brain that's changing rapidly at the moment and how music is one of the most systemic ways these changes could go through transition for young and old people and everyone in between. So I think we might open up specific channels for would-be creators. Others may not be so interested in these digital audio workstations like Logic Pro, or even GarageBand would be simple for some. Ableton. So we are working with music producers and famous DJs in the long term. Actually, there's really big news from Belgium, Mikhail. We just got a letter from the biggest music corporation in the world, and that's called Roland. And the office was in Belgium, and they asked us if we would receive a whole container van filled with Roland music instruments to be sent to Palawan for the schools. It's going to be like an overwhelming partnership between, you know, so already we're being recognized by people in the system that vibration is the next medicine. So we're really thankful to Belgium for that.
I have another question, because it's a bit of a conflict for me, because on one hand, okay, there could be a big job for me to learn with the new apps and programs, and yeah, I'm willing to do that. And on the other hand, hearing the sounds and the brainwave music and everything, I'm used to play music that cuddles people, you know, and yeah, that's something. Maybe it's my ego, but it's the sessions that I have been giving to people. I think the cuddling parts with the music was an important part. So if I'm gonna start with other music, I'm in a conflict with that.
Yeah, I understand. The inner dance holds trigger mechanisms. So like part of the awakening is actually to trigger, to create small triggers that hold these response mechanisms that allow transformation happen. If you were just going to hold meditative or loving music, then that's a specific genre of healing that is not exactly inner dance. So it's up to you how you want to build a style that holds the trigger mechanism. So it could be light, it could be, and I understand you because I understand Belgium. Belgium can be quite avant-garde, but it's very, very conservative. So we recently worked on a Belgian woman, for example, who came here, and she's someone to meet. She's incredible for anyone in Belgium. Her name is, so I'm not going to mention her name for privacy reasons, but basically she got into a big accident 30 years ago, and her brain got destroyed. She entered a coma for 3 weeks, and for 30 years she had problems talking. She's kind of a light language woman where she can't really order her words properly. She can't synchronize her movements so that when she tries to do this, she can't. Like when she tries to do that, this would go up and this would go down. So when she came here, she already experienced inner dance in Belgium and she had to come. She's kind of old. She's 60. When she heard the music, it was very uncomfortable, but she knew she needed it. So as she was laying down, she would be triggered. When people touch her, she just reacts like that. And, like some Belgian energy kind of holds this protective mechanism, because I've seen a lot of Belgians in the past, and inner dance is actually quite big there historically. But when she laid down to the higher frequencies, the more triggering ones, suddenly, let's say in the third inner dance, because she can't synchronize her arms, suddenly she did that, and then she was shocked. She hasn't done that in 3 years. So she went home to Belgium, and then her friends and family were kind of shocked because the way she was speaking, she lost the aphasia and she could actually order words again in a proper sequence that follows the rules. Like a lot of the physical symptoms that were impossible to heal by medicine have all almost gone. So her Belgian brain is what we call it. There's this heightened sensitivity that triggers the amygdala because of the thickened corpus callosum. There's something artistic and musical in the Belgian and in the French and so on and so forth. And it needs some careful holding so that the changes would occur maybe safely and naturally. So I understand where you're coming from. I think in Belgium things need to be safe, but in places like Spain and other places, the music that people need is very, very weird and like it's very extreme because that's where the range is. So I understand totally where you're coming from. Don't feel pressured by anything. It's really going to be up to you how you design your program.
I hope at the end of the course I can send you a playlist I've made, and then you can judge on that.
The whole group would be happy to try it out. It would be amazing. Thank you. Exciting. Okay, we can close. Actually, this is the first time we went so way over the 3-hour mark. It's 5:30 here. We have a session in an hour and a half. So thank you for staying. This is a super deep conversation. Some of you might want to watch it again in case there were some interesting things. But we will go into loops and repetitions and take up some of these topics again in future calls. Keep your questions alive. I will send the link to the apps. I would love for you to try them out and tell us what you think. Enjoy it. It's going to change your world. It's going to rock your universe. So if you could unmute, help me to close and say good night, good morning, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thanks.
everyone.
Good night. Bye.
Thanks
Night.
to everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Not just.
Thank
Bye-bye.